One of the charts that I ran was a delta chart, delta iceberg chart. And we call it delta iceberg is because you've got some that is above the waterline, the zero level, and you've got some that are below the waterline. And then you can see the commands in the charting two channel of how I did this. And effectively, what this is telling us the deltas that exist for the SPX. I went up about 125 points from where we closed right here at 5409. That was the last number, or 5408 or something like that. So very, very close. And over here, we have the calls. We have puts here and we have calls here. Why do we call them left-hand plane and right-hand plane? This is to get you kind of situated when you're thinking about calls and puts. The left-hand plane is where we have in-the-money calls, and we also have out-of-the-money puts. Left-hand plane. It's left-hand with relationship to where spot price is. And spot price right here, the way I drew the chart, is right in the middle, right? So same thing here, right in the middle. Now, why is that important to us? It's because we can combine those into a single value if we wanted to, and we'll talk a little bit later about this, where we aggregate those together. So if you keep them separated, which is what the netstat command actually will show us, we'll see the left-hand plane, the right-hand plane. Doesn't separate the calls and the puts unless there's a dominant. And I just want everyone to kind of look out here, and we're going to see this number 5,500. It's going to appear a few times tonight, and we'll talk a little bit about that. We're not aggregating in that netstat that I had up earlier. We're not aggregating. We're just looking at a single day. And so if you were to run these iceberg charts, you're looking at the edge. The edge, you can see right here, these are DTE, days to expiry, right? Sunday, when I ran this, Monday is the day that's out here. That's day 0, right? So it's figuring that that's fait accompli, and it's already there because we're after quote unquote the cutoff for each day, which is 1600. So this is already presuming now that we're counting down into the last day of expiry, which is why this is 0. So tying all this together. Okay, so what are we looking at here? So I just ran the delta charts, right? And we've got the delta charts that are shown in this top line right now. Now, here's that 5,500 number, and you can see that it's dominant on a couple of these lines, right? The 55 is where the largest strike of the right-hand plane is occurring, okay? And that's important. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's in the money or out of the money or whatever the case may be, but we know, for example, that in the right-hand plane, the puts, right, are in the money. We know this. We also know that the calls are out of the money, right? So what is netstat telling us here? Netstat is telling us that we've got a big strike at 5,500. It's red in this particular case, and what that means here is that it's put dominated. And there's this thing here where it says in the money puts is related to this number right here, this RHP integral. Now, what the heck does that mean? Well, when you look back at this, if you were to take here, this is a good way to kind of view this. If you were to take and start right here at the spot price, and you were to say, okay, what's my delta here at this strike? What's it here at this strike? And I start adding and subtracting all of these deltas together. That's called an integral. It's a summation, whatever. You can call it whatever you want. But we're going to repeat that for each expiry. And as it gets more and more negative, because deltas are negative for in the money puts, what happens is we get a big negative number there. All right. So what this is telling us, the first takeaway for reading netstat, when you look at this, if you look at just the top line, it's got a very, very big, on the right-hand plane, it's got a very big negative delta, which is in the money put dominated. Now we're going to see some other ones. I'm going to run some other charts here tonight that buck the trend, but I want you at least to kind of visualize what you're seeing here. And it's pretty clear when you look at the deltas here, why in the money puts are really dominating the entire conversation in the SPX right now. So when you look at this chart, it's like, duh, of course in the money puts are dominate. But you don't have to run this 3D chart or this iceberg chart in order to see that. You can actually just run the netstat. And so what this is basically telling us, these two fields are together, and they're telling us that it's in the money puts, and it's a big number. Now, why is that in the money put important? There are examples where this could say out of the money calls. Why? We do have out of the money calls here, but you can see from this example, there's nothing out there. There are no out of the money speculations going on, at least with the data from Friday morning in the SPX for the 0DTE for Monday. Given this, who's consuming all the air in the room? The in the money puts. If we had some pretty big spikes that were out here in deltas, we could see an instance where this side could dominate the in the money put side, but clearly everybody's been selling the SPX. This proves what you've been experiencing. It shows what you've been experiencing. And when we look at net delta, the light bulb goes off. Now, this RHP DTE is going to be 0 because that's the days to expiry in this particular case. And you can see they're all 0 because I only picked one day, and we're inside that time frames from 4 p.m. today, Sunday, into tomorrow. It's considered the 0DT. We start counting the new day countdown at 4:01 New York time. And so we're within this 0DTE framework in this particular case. And basically what this is telling us is that largest spike occurs on the 0DTE boundary. So as we aggregate charts, you're going to see perhaps this number look like a 5, maybe it'll look like a 7 or 10, or how many ever days out, wherever the biggest spike on that surface is. But as I spin this thing around, you can clearly see the biggest spike in the SPX on the deltas right now is clearly the Monday, tomorrow, right? There's nothing else for the next 7 days, 8 days that are sitting out there. Doesn't exist, right? Okay. And we didn't allow netstat to go looking out 8 days. Now I could. In fact, Taylor, I don't know if you want to jump up into charting too and just run that same command for netstat, but do a 0H or something like that so we can see what's out there while I'm talking, if you've got time to do it. All right, so this kind of lays out what's happening here. The 5,500 is that big strike that we had right here. You can see there's other strikes that are out there, right? I mean, there's a 55.15 that's also sitting out there. And oh, by the way, when we go out and look at that 55.15, where did we see that? Right here. Boom, boom, right? Now, these are gamma plots, but we'll talk a little bit more about this, but you can see there's pretty big OI or net OI out there. And here is that put OI that's sitting out there right now, okay? So this kind of helps you tie what you're seeing in the charts with what you're seeing in the web app. And now kind of can connect some of those dots. All right, so let's go back over here. Let's look at the left-hand plane, or the left-hand plane. The left-hand plane is that area that's below spot price. And in this chart, it's where the in-the-money calls are sitting and the out-of-the-money puts are sitting. Now, there is something sitting right here, 5,400, right? You can hover over this, and when that blue link, when you run the Discord charts, there's always a blue link in the return above the chart. You can always click that, and that's how you get this, right? How you get this screen. And then you can hover and you can move these things around, hold the mouse key down, and you can see all sorts of stuff in there, and you can play with and do whatever. So when you hover over this, it's 5,400. I know it says 53.99, 794, whatever. That's because just the graphics and the way it interpolates, but your mind knows we're on $5 boundaries in the SPX, so it has to be one of those, and it's 5,400. 400. There's that gamma again, and there's right here, we've got almost 3,000 puts, right, that are sitting here. Virtually no calls, no calls. Remember this, no calls, virtually all puts. So we're going to go back here. Guess what? I'm going to zoom in here. There's no calls, right? There's no calls, and it's all puts, right? So all this stuff kind of, I hope, starts coming together. And so you can use different things depending on whether you're graphical like the 3D plots or the iceberg plots or your, tabular, you can start putting some things together. A couple other things too. The left-hand plane integral. Now, we already talked about the right-hand plane integral, right? What we said with the right-hand plane integral is we take this value and we sum each of the deltas for each of the strikes as we go from spot price all the way out until we don't get any more change, until it goes back to zero. So we go walk all the way out the chain, not just what I displayed here, but literally as far up the chain as there's deltas. And so when you do that, you get the right-hand plane integral. And when we do this with this, we get the left-hand plane integral, right? And the left-hand plane integral is this stuff here. Left-hand plane for puts, left-hand plane for calls. We do that, right? So calls are positive delta. Puts are negative delta. So when we sum all that together, we get this. And what's this tell us? This is telling us we still have a negative number. Puts are in control. First thing, you see red, you see a minus sign, puts are in control. But you see they're out of the money puts. They're decaying. That's important. We're going to talk about that. And the fact that they're decaying and the fact that, by the way, you got a really small number and you still have puts out of the money, puts in control, there are no calls present, right? And what did we just see? We just saw on this front edge surface, there's a little blip down here. Looks to be 5370 maybe, and maybe 5300. And if we go look at here, 5300, there might be some calls that are sitting. Yeah, there's something down here, but it's like, right? There's no calls down here, right? And if there's no calls and you got a lot of puts, you've just got a lot of deltas that are going to be running the table here. So when we sum all those together on the left-hand plane, you get a particular case only because you can see it's out of the money put dominated, it's negative, and you can see it starts just flattening to zero, right along this edge right here. And that basically tells us there's not a lot of activity, there's not a lot of deltas because they are so far out of the money, right? They exist. You can go look at the open interest, right? We can scroll on down and you see a ton of puts here. They don't have any value. They don't have any value. How do you know they don't have any value? You can see this flat edge right here. There's no delta. You have to have some proximity to these things because they're so far out. So these are literally 0 delta, 1 delta, 2 delta, 3 delta, 4 delta, or I should say 0.01, 0.02, 0.03, all to the negative side, of course, because they're puts. But there's nothing down there, right? So when we add all this stuff together, you get some positive, right? We can go back and take a look here. We get some positive, sporadic. These are all going to be deltas limiting to 1, right? Because they're in the money, right? They have a positive value. And that's why when you look down this chart, you can see these things ending in 0, 0. So here's a little thing that you may not be aware of for the web app. We actually convert this over to shares, and what we do is we take the whatever the net is here, multiply it by 100. And that's why when you start seeing all these net deltas appear in 0, 0, you know that they're limited out. And we know green in this display means positive deltas, called related deltas. And that's because the puts are out of the money so far. They have no impact, at least at this price, right? At the price that we were just talking about. So let's go back to this. So we've got this small number. We already talked about that. We've got the out of the money puts, which we know are decaying. They're decaying towards the in the money calls, but there's not a lot of in the money calls that are down there. Again, 0 DTE is because we just picked tomorrow as the expiry, single expiry. And 5400 right now is the biggest left-hand plane delta that exists. Let's go look at it, right? 5400. Now, this is a gamma spike. This is not a a delta spike. But you can look down this line right here and you can say, well, sure enough, there it is, negative 121,000 deltas, right? So it's effectively the largest strike that occurs, and netstat tells us this. So pause. You're in the middle of the day. You want to know what's going on with the structure. You run netstat. First thing you see is that price is at 5409. You see you've got a big set of deltas sitting at 5400. You've also got a big set of deltas sitting at 5500. You've got just, you're swamping the boat with puts. Okay. We haven't even talked about any of these other things yet, but you're swamping the boat with this. A couple things come to mind here. If we lose 5400 during the day, then whatever positive or whatever deltas that we had here, we're going to basically push into the in the money status, and they're going to go over here into the right hand plane. This number is going to get more negative. The other thing that's going to happen is the next whatever the biggest spike is below us is going to appear. I mean, that's what netstat's going to try to find. And so if we drop below this, then it's going to go on down this list here, and it's going to say, what is the biggest delta that I can find? Where's my next level that if I keep falling below this level, I'm just going to keep shoving negative deltas into the book? Why does that matter for us as a trader? If we keep shoving big amounts, these big delta spikes into our book's getting shorter, the dealer's book's getting longer. And because this is the SPX, we are going to force the dealers to sell. We're going down, right? So these delta levels become big events. Doesn't mean we're going to pin against them and all that stuff that goes with it. But what it does mean is that we have the opportunity to start really shifting down fast if we move to the left of this particular strike. And by converse, if we were to move up, you can see we're removing those deltas from the book, those negative deltas. Let's talk about that. So as price starts making its way up towards 5,500. So in general, as price comes up in a negative dominated or a put dominated complex, I'm removing negative deltas out of the book, right? So our expectation is that we would start to see the left-hand plane start getting more positive, less negative. It might even go above zero, given this small number here, as we start including in the money calls. Remember, in the money calls really start forming as we get up into this area, right? So as we start including in the money calls, the deltas now start becoming as a wind in our back. And if we go over 5,500 in this particular case, then we remove a tremendous amount of negative deltas. What does that do? If we remove, remember, everything we do here, unless we explicitly say, everything we do at GammaEdge is from the trader's perspective. If we move across 5,500 from below, we're coming up underneath a in the money put strike, the biggest one, we're going to have the biggest removal of negative deltas. That's the same thing as adding positive deltas. Our book gets longer, dealer book gets shorter. If they were hedged flat, all things considered, they got to buy. This becomes that short covering rally. All of a sudden, we're now starting to push upward. So you can run the netstat command. You can get an immediate sense of where are my sensitivity points? Where are my biggest strikes that if I go across these things, that I'm really going to change how the market reacts, because these are the biggest strikes that are going to occur as we move up and down. Now, you have to pay attention. Are they call dominated or are they put dominated? So far, we've been talking about put dominated. We're going to continue that because there's 3 other sets of Greeks here that I think are important, at least 2 of them that I think are important, really important. All right, so just remember that. Doesn't mean we're going to pin to those numbers. It doesn't mean in the sense that, there's been some discussion this weekend, given this, are we going to pin these numbers? No, these are long strikes. Now, sometimes, and this is a little asterisk on this, sometimes you will see a minus sign in front of one of these strike numbers. That means it is a known short strike, and the amount there is fairly significant. We don't have that in this case. I don't see anything here, but as we get closer to, say, a JPM strike, or there's actually looking at the change file this weekend, there's actually some short interest that's out there where people are shorting down below us. So if we were to fall down, you might see some large strikes with a minus sign. I have no idea what the week holds, but just be aware if you do see a minus sign in front of it, it's a known short strike. And again, we normally see this when we go across a JPM strike, because those are typically fairly sized, especially this month's end of month size. Okay, so takeaway: deltas. You can always run this chart, get a sense, but you see very clearly from netstat 5,500 is a big series of strikes. Something else is out there. It didn't make the netstat command, but it's there. So there's always more information when you look at the 3D charts, but this will at least tell you where you're at. And by the way, if we do go up over 55, I can almost guarantee you that 55.15 would be the next major strike to go over, given the data that we have here, right? It would show it if you ran netstat after you cross 5,500, it would probably show the 55.15, unless there's something else above this that I didn't see. Well, I know there's nothing above it because netstat didn't show it, because netstat would have done all expiry or all strikes all the way up to wherever the delta goes non-zero.